This video is sponsored by B&H. Hey, what is up guys, MKBHD here, and welcome to a bit of a different type of video. My working title for it right now is just all the gear. So this whole thing, this idea started actually a long time ago, back when I was trying a bunch of different microphones. And there's a lot of gear on this channel, as you probably already know, but I was just trying a mic here, a mic there, and I eventually found the Sennheiser MKH416. And not a lot of people, not a lot of YouTubers are talking about this mic or reviewing this mic, so it just kind of had to pop up for me. And once I found it and started using it, I loved it. It's amazing. Now, typically with a find like this, I immediately want to use it a bunch and then turn around and review it and share it with you all. But even with as many of you as are into tech, how many of you are really interested in a $900 shotgun microphone? Like, not that many. So I sit on it. You know, I don't review it, but I've been using it ever since. And then this happened again with the whole process of a tripod. Found this sick tripod. Didn't really want to review it because how many people care, so I've just been using it. And this process has just been kind of happening behind the scenes for a while. So this video is a ton of those things in one place. And it's the sort of stuff that like the video nerd in me has been itching to share with you guys, but that I haven't had a good reason to make one video all about any one of these items. Now let me just address the question right off the bat. Is this overkill? Yeah, a lot of this stuff is. You can make great videos with a lot less than this, with none of this, honestly, and people do every single day. But for my fellow gearheads, the next few minutes are just filled with tips and gear and things that apply to a very small number of people. I've fully accepted that almost no one will actually watch the whole thing or care about this video, but for those of you who do, this is talking through all that. So we can start right off the bat with this. Just this set right here, just me talking to the camera. You've seen it before. Some might call it BRoll. Even a simple set like this has a bunch of stuff, a bunch of gear I haven't talked about going on with it. So this is that gear. So I can start with the camera. That's sort of the most obvious place. I've talked about these before, but these are Red's DSMC2 bodies, Monstro 8K sensor. Phenomenal in every way. Like, they're more camera than I can ever use, but I love them to pieces. And they're amazing. So when I'm talking to the camera like this, the lens I'm almost always using is the Sigma 24-35 Cine. And that's because it's a sharp, high quality, wide angle zoom lens that most importantly covers the full frame Monstro sensor. There's also a photo version, of course. And in the Cine world, it's a little cheaper than the competition, but honestly, for a lot of what I do, it's actually better. It opens all the way up to T2, it's super sharp, I like it. And then the lighting. So this is the sort of lighting look that's been dialed in. So the room, of course, is lit with overhead lights. They're 5,000 Kelvin, just LED overhead lights, nothing special. But that's just lighting the room straight down from the top. So lighting me in this set is a SkyPanel S60C with a 4-foot gigantic softbox on it. It's massive. But I've gone through a bunch of different key lights in my time, and this one's turned into my favorite just because it's so incredibly powerful and very, very soft. And it does a bunch of other things even when it's not the key light. So the C in the name stands for color, and it can make pretty much any color at any intensity pretty easily. It gets insanely bright. Right now it's at less than half brightness, and it's a great key light replacing the sun. And it's also super heavy, so I never really carry it anywhere. I pretty much always have it on wheels. So this is basically a light stand with wheels on it. And this is one of the themes of the studio, actually. It's just to put as many things on wheels as possible. Highly recommended. There's also one fill light in this set, pretty simple, but it's just off camera, and it's just sort of filling in general brightness of this set for this high key look. And it's an Aperture 300D. So it's actually, this is one of the more well-reviewed things on YouTube from this list. You can use it with or without the light dome diffusion, depending on how soft you want it to be. And it is also on wheels. It won't get as soft as a SkyPanel. I used to use it mainly as a key light, but the SkyPanel is a much bigger source. But these apertures are great value. They're pretty popular for a reason. And then there is audio. So obviously video is only half the story. Audio, I always undersling, so the microphone is always just below the camera, right below that sight line. And it's this rig right here, and it's pretty flexible. I could put the mic almost anywhere with it. But it's a MixPre 633. It's the only preamp / recorder I need to use. It's incredible. Sitting on this little platform that screws into a microphone stand and holds it up so I can see it. And it's connected to the mic I talked about, the Sennheiser MKH416, that shotgun. I'm gonna try to link just about everything I'm talking about that's useful below if it's available online. It's probably from B&H. And honestly, it's because B&H has been pretty much the go-to place for video gear for me, and has been for a long time, like since before college. And they also happen to be extremely close by. They're in New York City, so right across the river. So shipping for me is dangerously fast, and the prices are great and everything, and if I need something right away, I've been known to just go over there and get it. And there's also always plenty of staff over there willing to help out. So shout out to B&H for sponsoring this gear tour video and for carrying this stuff. All right, so what else are we noticing in this set? Pretty simple back here. This is what we call a little practical light. This is a Quasar Science 4-foot tube. It can do RGB light, it can do white light, it can do all sorts of effects if you want it to. It's a 4-foot tube just sort of freestanding there. Shout out to Dave 2D, who's the first one I saw in tech videos anyway, using one. I don't know if he uses a Quasar Science tube or something else, but they look great. I haven't used them to light any actual subjects yet, but they are awesome as practicals or backgrounds or sort of effects lights. You may even remember them from the Portal intro for the Galaxy S10 display video. Oh, and right off camera also, here's even one more niche thing that we've used for videos. This is just a BenQ desktop monitor on a VESA mount on wheels. We call it Karen. Shout out to Plankton's girl. But it's great for when we're all looking at the same view. If we're building a more elaborate set or something, we don't all want to crowd around this small monitor. So it plugs straight into the camera via HDMI, and then we can all share this monitor, which is just mirroring it. In the future, maybe we'll get like a full-on TV on wheels or something, but this has been pretty great too. All right, then there is the BRoll, which is the recording of the actual products and tech and objects instead of the people, which I think I do a lot more of. And that's actually where you'll see a lot more specific gear to do that sort of thing, which brings me to one of my favorite lenses ever, actually, and that would be the Zeiss Otis 55mm f1.4. So this is a medium lens. It's not really a wide angle, but it's also not super telephoto, and it's incredibly sharp. But I will say the one downside of this lens, why I don't use it even more often than I do, is because the minimum focus distance is a little far. It's almost 2 feet, which is much further than something like a macro lens, which you can get much closer up to an object with. So that's this. This is my macro lens and probably my third of the big three of choice. It's the Canon 100mm f2.8 stabilized macro lens. So putting this thing in front of an 8K sensor will literally let you see things that your eye doesn't see. And it sounds like I'm exaggerating, but it's really true. Like I'll put a phone down or something that looks totally clean with a microfiber, and then I'll zoom in for focus on this 100mm and I'll see all these little flakes of dust and hairs, and I'll have to clean it again because this picks up every little detail. So this is an amazing lens for getting smaller detail shots of things like buttons or tiny objects or things that you ordinarily wouldn't notice from being further away. And then my favorite slider right now, which doesn't change very often, I've had maybe 3 major full-time use sliders ever, but my current favorite is this guy. It's extremely smooth, which a slider should be, and carries a lot of weight. This is called the Magic Carpet Pro by Syrup. The rails are pretty thick. It's not belt driven anymore like my previous favorite, but it is still extremely smooth using what they call this flywheel tech. And then on top of all that, I think I can safely call it modular, which is actually pretty useful for a slider. So in most cases when you're doing a lot of small objects like this, you only need 2, maybe 3 feet tops of room to actually do a slide that's convincing and fun and makes a small object like this a little more exciting. But if you have a bigger subject like a car, for example, you need much more space to do a slide like that. So being able to add 3 feet of track and just keep adding more and more track just by popping the ends off is actually really useful, and you can do that with this. So that's been pretty useful as well. And then the slider right now is sitting on this really unique piece of gear that we'll call the pedestal. Shout out to John from TLD for showing me this in the first place. It is dangerous to go hang out with him and discover video gear, but this thing is really impressive. So I went out to shoot that autofocus episode on the Tesla Model 3 in California, and when I was there, I was borrowing this weird rolling tripod thing, but it could do all these weird camera moves that I couldn't typically do with a normal tripod. So if you can just imagine a tripod with wheels at each corner, and then with a structure connecting it, and then a height adjustable base in the center with crab steering, which lets you turn the wheels and then roll on any smooth surface. So it's also kind of like a slider. That's what this pedestal is. You've seen much bigger versions of this in like newsrooms. This is much smaller because we use smaller cameras in that. But I've used it a couple times since I've gotten it in like very specific situations. One that might come to mind is the Apple Watch review. There's a floating shot where I'm checking the time on the watch and walking down a hallway. Those are the types of shots you can't get with really any other video tool. You could try it with a jib, you could try it with a Steadicam, but yeah, you find uses for things with wheels like this that typically are a little difficult to come by. So this is why we use the pedestal often. So this really has been one of those specialty pieces of gear that you sort of figure out uses for as you go, which has been pretty great. But speaking of specialty, Yeah, Mia is one of those super specialty things. It's a robot holding a camera, and there's 10,000 things you can do with a robot that you can keyframe moves into that you couldn't do with a human. So the thing about having a camera robot, as you can see, it's such an extreme, unique tool that it is very tempting to use it all the time. I've talked about this with people in text and other video makers. Why don't you use the robot all the time? But then you'd kind of get tired of it. You'd feel like you see it all the time and you might actually take it for granted. So it's a specific challenge of mine to not use the robot all the time. But when we do use it, it is super cool. So first of all, not only is this Epic W not permanently, but basically all the time mounted onto the robot, we also have a motorized Fizz system, Fizz being F-I-Z, focus, iris, and zoom. So this 18 to 35 has manual rings that the robot can also control. We also have a 100mm macro mapped the same way so that it can be controlled with the rings. And just like I showed in that dope tech video back a couple years ago when we first discovered this, it can be controlled using an Xbox controller. And that's exactly how we do it. There's an iMac over there running Windows and the Motorized Precision software for me to exactly dial in and keyframe the moves that we build that you end up seeing in the videos. So the few times you do see a really crazy looking or interesting or fascinating move, whether it's moving really fast or you get some sort of orbital rotation that a human couldn't do, that's because we dreamt up the move, built it using their software and keyframing and an Xbox controller, lit around it, flagged, staged, made sure everything worked, and then pressed record. Actually, there's a record button in the software, and made it happen. And I'm really glad we have it. All right, so next up is the top-down set where we're at. And when I say top-down, you can probably picture the sort of overhead, top-down looking sets. And as complex as those can get sometimes, the actual gear setup to make them happen is pretty simple. So you have the light source over here, huge 4-foot wide KinoFlow bulbs, and they're going through this white sheet that makes it a very soft light source. And the camera is on this. So this is a Kessler Pocket Jib Pro. The word pocket, a bit of a misnomer because it's kind of already huge, but in the world of jibs, this is pretty small actually. So this is the Pocket Jib Pro. There's a Manfrotto 502 head on it, and then of course the camera pointed straight down off of that. And then the rest of this is essentially light control, so we can get these looking consistent and the same way every time. So there's flags, there's different modifiers, cutting light at certain points to make it spread evenly across this surface. And then the surface itself is kind of a jerry-rigged solution, but it's essentially a bunch of these thin aluminum sheets that have a vinyl skin, a dbrand skin, on them that looks like a surface or some sort of color. And we have a bunch of these. This is the concrete one. It's just a small area that looks like concrete, and when you fill it up in the frame of the top down, looks like you're looking at concrete. This is actually one of those simple setups that kind of applies to, you can put any camera in here. You can put any number of different lights in these positions, but generally this rule of thumb for this simple setup, big, soft, light source coming in on top of a surface like this, just looks good. All right, so some other small pieces of gear. One of my favorites here is this old vintage manual lens called the Helios 44. It's a 58mm lens, and you can't even buy them new anymore. They're just secondhand in most cases. It's not a sharp lens. There's color fringing and tinting in various colors. It's the opposite of the technical lens you're used to, but what makes it awesome is it has the most spirally anamorphic looking bokeh I've ever seen in a non-anamorphic lens. So you'll know it when you see it. It showed up here and there, but it's really fun. And this lens is actually really cheap. It's usually like 50 bucks, so it's easy to recommend. Then there's this weird looking lens. It's a 15mm macro tilt shift lens. I don't even use it for the tilt shift part, but I swear to you, I'm not exaggerating, the minimum focus distance is literally touching the front glass. So this being such a wide angle lens makes it great for shooting inside cars and things like that, where you're in a tight space and you're really close to things. And then this guy here is the Canon 11 to 24. 11mm is hilariously wide on a full frame sensor, but sometimes that's what you need when shooting inside a car. And this gigantic front element, of course, means you can't use ND filters or anything, so I almost never use this lens outside, but it's basically the only lens I've used to shoot the videos where I'm talking inside my car. Then there's the lav mics. So I use a shotgun most of the time, 90-something% of the time, but sometimes you do need a lav for a collab or an interview style type of thing. These are Lectrosonics PDR recorders. You record straight to micro SD cards, and then the Sanken COS11D is the name of the actual mic. One for me, and one for Lou or Bill or Elon or whoever we need audio from for that video. Then this is a drone. Hey, this is the DJI Mavic 2 Pro. You've probably seen one of these before, and it looks kind of like a baby transformer in a weird way when I hold it like this. But the drone use has been limited, but it's great for top downs of much larger objects like cars. But I want to get better at using aerial video more in the future. All right, some last second quick hitters. So we get pretty good at knowing where we can take the RED cameras and where we can't. I especially know the weight and size of it and when I can do manual focus and when I can't. But there are certain projects or types of things where you can't. Autofocus videos are number one. We tend to stick to Canon stuff because we're very comfortable with the colors, but their autofocus is also phenomenal. You've probably heard about dual pixel autofocus. So Canon C200 is the primary Canon camera we go to when we're not bringing the RED around. Believe it or not, this is smaller and easier to use. It shoots to real media cards. It has a real long battery life. It has an EVF, but most importantly, that autofocus. So a pretty decent amount of those car follow shots that you've seen, where we're either pointing the camera out a window or out the back of a car at a moving car, that's a good combination of RED and C200. So thanks to C200 for that. And it's got the 18-35 on it, the photo version. The Canon's autofocus works pretty great with any Canon compatible lens, so that's awesome. And then Canon 1DX is also significantly smaller. This was my only camera during Tesla's Model Y event, back when I went out to California. Anytime you see a vlog style video like that, obviously it has to be an even smaller camera. And also this with a smaller autofocus lens, like a 16-35, is great for a Steadicam. So anytime you have Ronin S shots, for example, the studio tour with Lou, this had a lot of shots from the 1DX on that Ronin S. Also shout out to this guy. This is called the Westcott Flex, and this is exactly what it looks/sounds like. It's a flexible little light panel that either plugs into the wall or can be battery powered. We usually plug it into the wall, but this is what you've seen that's either added just like a splash of color or a glow in the background. I'll show you some footage where that's been used and point out where the flex is. Sometimes it's also even used as a fill light on my face with a bit of a warmer light, since this is technically a bicolor, two different color LEDs, but the warmer ones will act as a nice warm splash. Or as you can see right now, it can be a reflector, but we don't actually use it as a reflector. All right, I don't wanna say this is the greatest tripod ever made, but for anyone who's used tripods for a long time before, you're familiar with the whole like extending the leg and re-tightening it process, and it's been annoying for a long time. That's why I love these. But the legs are called the Flowtech 75. It's a 75mm ball head, so you can put any other 75mm ball head on top. I happen to use another Sackler ball head, but the reason these are amazing is because the adjustment process is that. So I mean, that's basically all I had to see. I saw a couple of videos about this. Of course, it's a carbon fiber tripod. It's lightweight. There's other advantages to it, but the main reason this tripod's so good is because it's that easy to adjust. As soon as I saw that, I got one of them, and then I started replacing my other tripods with this one because of that. So now it's the only tripod I use. All right, last but not least, we have arrived at DJI Ronin 2. This whole stabilizer, this whole rig is actually just the DJI Ronin 2. Now, I'd messed around with the Movi for a little bit, and it was great, but it was a little smaller and didn't quite have the battery life I was looking for. Ronin 2 has had a great battery life. And of course, having the whole cage thing and being able to sit it down wherever you want is great. And it's super modular, so we've been able to set it up exactly how we want based on what we're shooting with it. So two things that come to mind we've shot with Ronin 2. Number one, autofocus videos as well. Hanging out the back of an SUV or on a track with one of these, playing it at an Acura NSX. That was rigged one way, but it was rigged a totally different way with some other accessories when John was holding it. Shout out to John again from TLD. When we were doing the factory tour with Elon Musk, that's a totally different rig to be able to walk in and out between factories and robots moving around you. But when it comes down to it, the bottom line is we use it, again, for camera movement. The same idea with the pedestal, the same idea with the slider. And the whole point, obviously, for all this gear stuff that we've had is to be able to tell a story or show your visual in a little bit of a more interesting way. Now, is most of it overkill? Yeah, I just showed you guys a camera attached to a robot that does keyframed moves built into computer software. That kind of stuff is ridiculous, but it is way too much fun not to share, so I figured I would share it with you guys. So even if you're not in the market to pick up any of this stuff, which probably most of you aren't, hope you enjoyed watching it and maybe you learned a thing or two if you enjoyed seeing the type of stuff. But this has been the Gear Tour. Thank you for watching. Talk to you guys in the next one. Peace. But the one downside it has is the minimum focus distance is a little far. It's almost 2 feet. It's 1.5 feet away from the lens, which can make it a little tough to use for macros. So I don't. I mean, you can get really close to a subject. It's basically, if you can imagine.
What the fuck? Is that on camera?
Yeah. Yeah, I almost fought you.